أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So we had a break last week, but before that we've been going through the sections relating to divorce and things connected to divorce. We mentioned a couple of the different types of oaths that people make, which is the oath of ila, which is the oath not to have sexual intercourse with your wife, and the oath of dhihar, which is basically an oath saying that your wife is haram for you without saying it directly. Basically by saying she's like somebody who is haram for you. So those two types of oaths, we mentioned them last time, and we mentioned that, you know, what one of them is broken by the ila, by going back to your wife within that period of time, otherwise the party can divorce you. And the other one, dhihar, in order for you to go back to being with your wife, you have to do an expiation or a kafara before you can do that, to clear away the rubble of that oath, so you can once again be intimate with your wife. But we're moving on to the third of these things that are connected, and this is the most serious, and this is called li'an. Li'an. This is something that's described in the beginning of Surah An-Nur, and this is basically the word la'ana. You might have heard it before. It's a common curse that people get, la'natullah, the curse of Allah is often translated, but la'na is like making somebody as far away as possible from the mercy of Allah, is what it means basically. So li'an is basically when somebody, the reason why it's called that is because in the oaths that the husband makes, he has to make a fifth oath in which he declares that the la'na of Allah will be on him if he's lying. So that's why it's called li'an. And this is when a husband accuses his wife of infidelity. Not infidelity, but the sexual act. Either by saying that he's seen her commit this act with somebody, and it's not so stringent as a witness. A witness, the four witnesses when you talk about the had punishment for adultery, have to actually see the act of penetration, the one member going into the one sexual organ and the other sexual organ going into each other, as he will actually describe in this section. But well, yeah, I mean, it is possible.
Four people.
Yes, very unlikely, but it is possible.
I mean, like.
I mean, it's not enough to simply see two people under covers together, for example. I mean, that's not enough. Or two people going into a room and then hearing sounds, and then those people emerging from the room, and the smell of something having happened, that's not enough. But for a husband, even despite what he says here, it's enough where he is absolutely certain that it's happened. So yeah, because he might be a blind husband. So how would he know? So it might be through sounds, it might be through feeling it, it might be through other things like that. Well, no, circumstantial evidence is not enough. But you don't have to actually see the actual penetration. You just have to be certain. You're in the room. You have to be certain they're having sexual intercourse. That's enough for a husband. So that's one of them, is what they're going to go through here. And the other one is her turning up pregnant. And then the husband saying, that's not my child. Now, there's certain things connected to this as well. And that is when she claims she is pregnant, if he has been continuing to sleep with her, for example, but he's been pulling out. And so he says, it's impossible, it can't be my child. And then he accuses her, that's not enough. Actually, the qadi will say, no, we're not doing the li'an here. You're not allowed, it's forbidden for you to enter these proceedings because there's too much doubt here. You know, it could be your child. It's not a guarantee when you're pulling out that she won't get pregnant. Or if you've been continuing to have sexual intercourse with her and the child comes up and you're a white man and the child's black, you say, that can't possibly be my child. Or you're a black man and the child's white, that can't possibly be my child. That, again, is not enough grounds. That's not enough grounds. You have to, it can't be that. There has to be more to it than that. I mean, because you've been having sexual intercourse with her. So it's still, there are very small chances of that happening, but it can happen. So that's not enough grounds either for the li'an proceedings. But anyway, we'll go into what he says here. He says here, وَالْلِعَانُ بَيْنَ كُلِّ الزَّوْجَيْنِ. This li'an proceeding, and it has to be done in front of a qadi. It's not simply something that they stand in public and start haranguing each other and then making these oaths. No, what happens here is the husband raises the issue with the qadi, and then he makes a public accusation against her of zina on the basis that he's seen her or on the basis that he's found her pregnant, and hasn't been having sexual intercourse with her since the last time she had a menstrual period, or the last time she was pregnant and gave birth. And then the qadi says, okay, all right, I want you both to come, takes them to the mosque or to the courthouse, and then says to the husband, okay, now you swear the oaths. This is the li'an process. It's described in Surah Al-Nur, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ أَزْوَاجَهُمْ, those who accuse their wives, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُمْ شُهَدَاءُ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُم, and there are no witnesses that they can find except for themselves. They are the only witnesses. فَشَهَادَةُ أَحَدِهِمُ, one of them, in other words, the husband, makes the shahada, makes the testimony, or swears the oaths. فَشَهَادَةُ أَحَدِهِمُ أَرْبَعَ شَهَادَاتٍ بِاللَّهِ, he swears 4 oaths by Allah that the thing that he says is true. And then he says, لَمِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ أَرْبَعَ شَهَادَاتٍ بِاللَّهِ إِنَّهُ لَمِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ, that he swears 4 oaths that he's telling the truth, that he is one of the truthful. وَالْخَامِسَةُ اللَّعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ, and the 5th oath that he makes is that may Allah's curse be upon him, may he be far from the mercy of Allah, and Allah's mercy not reach him if he is telling a lie. And then he says here, then it says, وَيَضْرَأُ عَنْهَا الْعَذَابَ, and the punishment, she can take it away from herself. In other words, she can be safe from the had punishment. Because if he says this, then she says nothing. She's guilty of a had, something that requires the had punishment for zina. No? He's going to mention that in a bit. وَيَضْرَأُ عَنْهَا أَذَابَ أَنْ تَشْهَدَ أَرْبَعَ شَهَدَاتٍ, for her to then swear 4 oaths, أَرْبَعَ شَهَدَاتٍ بِاللَّهِ, by Allah, إِنَّهُ لَمِنَ الْكَاذِبِينَ, he is a liar. So she swears 4 oaths, he's telling lie, he's lying. He's lying, he's lying, he's lying. وَالْخَامِسَةُ أَنْ غَضِبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهَا, and the 5th, that may Allah's wrath, anger, be upon her if he is telling the truth. So this is where this whole process, and that is the process that we follow in this. So he says here, it is between these two, the couple, they come before the qadi, بَيْنَ كُلِّ الزَّوْجَيْنِ فِي نَفْيِ حَمْلٍ, so the 2 types are to reject or to deny paternity of the child that she is pregnant with, في نفي حمل, of her pregnancy, يدعي قبله الاستبراء, and he makes sure that he also claims that before she fell pregnant, she had a sign that her womb was free. In other words, she had a menstrual period, or the other one, as I mentioned earlier, was that she gave birth to a child, and then since the last time she gave birth to a child, he didn't have sexual intercourse with her again. He says, unless the child is born within 6 months of the previous birth, in which case it could be a delayed child that's connected to a delayed twin. But if it's after 6 months, this is something new, and he's not been with her, so it's clearly not from him. So that's the thing. أو رؤية الزنا, or seeing the act of zina, كالمروة في المقحلة. So this is what is specific to a shaheed, a witness. He says, like a kohol stick that they put on your eyes, like an eyeliner, being inserted into its case. So he's taking the position here, which is actually the weaker position in the madhab. The stronger position in the madhab is it's not so strict for the husband. But this is the position that it is for witnesses. You have to actually see the act of penetration. But The general position is he just simply has to be certain of it, not simply making assumptions, as I mentioned before. There's a difference of opinion about when he comes to the Qadi and simply says, my wife committed zina. She's being unfaithful to me. And he doesn't say whether he saw it or whether it's because she's pregnant or anything like that. Then there's a difference of opinion about that form of accusation. The stronger position is, well, there's two positions. They're both quite strong. One of them is that it's treated the same. The other one is that he simply gets the had punishment for impugning her honor, for false accusations because he has no proof and he hasn't made a claim that he saw it or made a claim that she's pregnant. So and it's a big thing in the deen to impugn a woman's honor, her ird. وَإِذَا افْتَرَقَا بِاللِّعَانِ. So when they both swear their oaths here, when the husband swears and the wife says, no, I'm not going to swear an oath, then she opens herself up to had punishment. Unless, of course, he's somebody who's not capable of having children, in which case it was a pointless accusation anyway, in a sense, because it's an obvious thing. So there's certain cases where they don't bother with the li'an proceedings, but here, generally speaking, if she refuses to testify, then unless she can prove something like she was raped, or she can make a claim that no, of course I'm pregnant. Somebody raped me, that. Unless something like that can happen, then she gets the had punishment. Now, the type of had punishment she gets, he mentions in a little bit. Depends. So then, if she swears the oaths that I just mentioned, so the husband swears that she was unfaithful, then she swears that no, I wasn't, and he's lying, then obviously one of them has to have been lying here. It's a very, very serious thing. Accusations have been made public that are very damaging accusations, and one of them is lying about it. This is something that can never be repaired. It's done. So basically, this condition is if they are separated by this, they both swear the oaths, bil-li'an, by means of li'an, lam yatanakaha abadan. They can never, ever again marry each other, ever. It's much worse than 3 divorces. 3 divorces, if she marries somebody else and consummates the marriage with somebody else, then divorces that other person, then yes, she can remarry her original husband. This, never. Not even if they each live 1,000 years, which is very unlikely, but never. This was happened in the time of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in fact, and it was mentioned in that, and this is the ruling that was made. He said that it was worse than the fact they lied about it made it a worse situation than anything. وَيَبْدَأُ الزَّوْجُ. So how does this happen? He says here, the zawj, the husband, is the one who is told to stand up first. He swears his oaths. فَلْيَتَعِنْ. He makes his oaths of li'an, أَرْبَعَ شَهَادَاتٍ بِاللَّهِ, 4 shahadas by Allah. ثُمَّ يُخَمِّسُ بِاللَّعْنَةِ. Then he makes the 5th that, invoking Allah's la'na, curse on him. Then تَلْتَعِنُ. Then she is told to stand up, and she does her 4 shahadat, her 4 testimonies. Here arba'an aydan. She does 4 again. وَتُخَمِّسْ بِالْغَضَبِ. And she does the 5th, invoking Allah's anger on her. كَمَا ذَكَرَ اللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the ayats that we mentioned earlier. وَإِن نَكَلَتْ. And if she refuses to swear her oath, here, rujimat. She is stoned to death. In kanat hurratun muhsana. She is hurra if she is a free woman, because there's different rulings between free people and slaves. If she is a free person and is what's called muhsan in Arabic. And muhsan is someone who has been married and sexually active in a marriage with her husband. Whether it was with this current husband who's accusing her or a previous husband. The moment she is in a marriage and is sexually active with her husband, her status changes from ghayru muhsana to muhsana. So that means her had punishment changes from what it was to now being death for adultery. So you might say, well, how could it possibly be he be accusing her if she's in a marriage where it hasn't happened? Well, obviously, they could have just got married and they haven't been active together. This is her first marriage. And then he goes away and comes back and finds her pregnant. And they've not been together, so he accuses her. And then she refuses to swear the oaths. So then she receives this had punishment. She says, مُحْصَنَةٌ بِوَطْعٍ تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ هَذَا الزَّوْجِ. She has been made muhsana by sexual intercourse, تَقَدَّمَ, that happened beforehand, مِنْ هَذَا الزَّوْجِ, of this man who is accusing her current husband, أَوْ زَوْجٍ غَيْرَهُ, or some other husband before him. وَإِلَّا, if she is not muhsana, she has never been sexually active in a marriage before, جُلِّدَتْ مِئَةْ جَلْدَةٍ, she is given 100 lashes. That's the one that's mentioned in the Book of Allah, the punishment for fornication. The other one is mentioned in the Hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَإِنَّكَ لَلزَّوْجِ, if the husband goes to the Qadi and says, my wife's committed adultery, I saw her committing adultery with so-and-so, and then the Qadi says to her, okay, you both come now to the mosque or come to the courthouse, and then he tells the husband, stand up, and the husband stands up and he says, swear your oaths, and the husband said, no, I'm not going to swear them. He started these whole proceedings, and now he's refusing to swear the oaths that will start this li'an process going. What happens then? He says, وَإِنَّكَ لَلزَّوْجِ جُلِّدَ حَدَّ الْقَذْفِ. He is given the had punishment for false accusations of impropriety, of sexual intercourse against his wife. So whatever happens, as soon as the accusations are made, somebody is going to be punished, or they are going to be haram for each other forever. So it's quite a serious process, this. Jullida had al-qadh 80. He's given 80 lashes, which is the had for impugning somebody's honor, false accusations of sexual intercourse against a woman. وَاللَّحِقَ بِهِ الْوَلَدِ. But if this thing he accused her of results in her having a child, whether it's from him seeing her with somebody but then refusing to swear an oath, or he saw her pregnant and then refused to swear the oath, when that child is born, the child is his and is affiliated with him, considered to be his child. The only way in the deen, it's important to know, to stop a child born to somebody you are married to from being affiliated to you and being considered your child is through li'an. So if she gives birth to a child, the only way that child is not considered to be your child is through this li'an process, or that's generally the one, or there is the one with rape, which if it's established immediately and then brought before the qadi. But still, if you're sexually active with a woman who is raped and she gives birth to a child, that child is still considered to be yours. Unless it can be, because we don't accept DNA evidence and all those things. It's to do with witnesses and things like that. So that's basically the only way of really stopping a child being attributed to you is through the li'an process. So now he's finished with the li'an. Are there any questions about that process? Something that's best avoided. It's important to know that it's obligatory if you are convinced that the child is not yours. You have valid reason, not just simply supposition. You know for a fact that you've not been with her, and then she has a child. Then it's obligatory on you to do this li'an process, because the deen does not like children to be attributed falsely. But if you see her engaged in the sexual act, it's permitted for you to bring the process, but it's better not to. It's better to do satr, to cover the faults of a fellow Muslim. So there's a difference between the two types here in terms of the ruling on it. With children, to protect the hasab, the lineage, it's obligatory. simply seeing your wife engaged in a sexual act, the best thing to do, which is hard for most people because of the natural ghira in the human being, is not to bring it up. Well, now we move on to a second one. Well, just that's up to you, whether you can stand to be with her or not after that. But I'm just saying the actual li'an, this process, staying with her is a separate thing from entering into this li'an process.
What do you mean if she doesn't have a child?
Yeah, if you just see the sexual act with her. But if she has a child and you know for a fact that you've not been with her, yes. If you're not sure because you've been having sexual intercourse with her as well, just the child doesn't look anything like you, then that's not grounds and you're not allowed to.
Husband saw that, but he doesn't have convincing evidence of it. And he could both talk about it and agree to divorce it and separate from each other.
We don't have to agree. It's the divorce is in the hand of the husband.
Yeah, like
So if he is suspicious of her and he cannot bear to be with her as a result of this suspicion, then they're gonna have a pretty poisoned relationship.
So instead of going to li'an, they can just separate.
Yes, absolutely. We're moving on to a second one here, which we talked about before, or another one, which is khul'. We mentioned before about khul', which is when the wife ransoms herself or pays the husband something to release her from the marriage, so that she can basically ask him to divorce her in exchange for something, and he agrees to do that. We mentioned before there was a possible. He now explains how it's done. He says, "Walil mar'a, a woman, the wife, has the right and taftadiya, literally to ransom herself. A ransom is when somebody's holding something, like in a sense she's almost being held captive because she doesn't want to be in this situation anymore. So it's basically giving you the idea that she's being held captive by the enemy and somebody's coming along to pay her to be released. Either she can pay herself from her own money or somebody else can come and pay for her. What does she normally pay? He gives an example, like in the time of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this was the one that happened, was when a woman had been given an orchard of date palms by her husband, and she gave them back. So he says, bisadaqiha, her dowry, returning her dowry, giving her dowry back. That's one. But it's not limited to that. He says, aw aqal, aw akthar. Or it can be less than that. It can even be nothing. Or it can be more than that. The husband may refuse. Say, no, I'm not releasing you simply for you to give my dowry. I want more back because of all this more I've given you, or whatever it is. Some husbands just, can... Yeah, they can refuse, and they can be quite unreasonable, even when he says. But this is only in cases when there is no darar, what you might term in modern terms abuse. So if it turns out that she paid him, and he had in fact been causing her harm, and that this harm is not something that requires witnesses in the same way as other things. It does require witnesses, but it could be simply the servants in the house. 2 females are enough in this, accompanied by her oath. It doesn't have to be rigorous in the same way as other things. For example, they heard the husband beating her. They heard the sounds, even if they didn't see it. That would be enough grounds, and so on. If it goes to the Qadi and he decides, yes, this is enough grounds to determine that this was abuse, then if she gave him her dowry back in order for her to release her, he has to then pay it back to her, and she remains separated from him. So he says here, إِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مِنْ ضَرَرٍ بِهَا, so long as it wasn't caused by him causing harm to her, by him abusing her. فَإِنْ كَانَ عَنْ ضَرَرٍ بِهَا, if she had asked for this release, this khula, because he had been causing her harm, it wasn't simply because they'd just grown apart or she just couldn't stand being with him anymore or whatever. It was actually a relationship where she was being abused and that she wanted a way out, and so she offered money. He says, if it was because of that, رَجَعَتْ بِهِ بِمَا أَعْطَتُ, she claims back and recovers from him whatever she gave him. وَلَزِمَهُ الْخُلْعَ, and the divorce that they agreed remains an obligation on him and he can't take that back. وَالْخُلْعُ طَلْقَةٌ, this khul' is a single divorce, one divorce, لَا رَجْعَةَ فِيهَا, that he cannot take her back during it. So we talked about divorces. There are revocable and irrevocable divorces, and irrevocable and final, which is the three. So revocable is a man goes to his wife and says, I divorce you, out of his own choice, intending one divorce. During her iddah, which we're going to come to the iddah in a minute, he has the option of taking her back during that time by having sexual intercourse with her. Yes? And then it's as if they were never divorced. Of course, he's lost that divorce, but they just go back to being married again. They don't need to do any new ceremony or anything like that. This one is a single divorce that's irrevocable. It cannot be reversed by the husband. He cannot take her back. If he wants to get back together with her, he has to remarry her with a full ceremony, with a wali, with a dowry, and all of those things. He can do it, though, in the iddah here. Because we mentioned the purpose of an iddah is to prevent her getting married in that period. That is what an iddah is about. It's a period of time where she's not allowed to get married. Apart from to the person who divorced her. He's the one exception. And the final one, obviously, is that they cannot get back together until she marries somebody else. That's the third of these three types. And then there is also something which is called fasakh, which sometimes it involves a divorce, as we've mentioned, but sometimes it doesn't even take away a divorce. It's simply they're separated and they were together, but the marriage didn't count. So they're separated from each other. And then they haven't lost any divorces and they can remarry after. Usually, even in those situations, you wait for her womb to be clear, unless it is, clearly he was the man who was with her in that marriage. Again. لا رجعة فيها إلا بنكاح جديد برضاها. So the only way he can get back together again with her is with a new marriage with her consent. The other one doesn't need her consent. The first one, when you divorce her once and it's revocable, you can take her back. This choice is still, she's basically still married to you. It's as if you haven't fully relinquished your right to marriage with her. This one, she's given you money, so it can't be that way. Although otherwise all that money she gave go to waste, and the deen does not let things go to, actions go to waste in that way. So now he does a few things we're not going to go into great detail about because it's something that doesn't happen today because we don't have slaves. But he says here, this is divorce among slaves. He says, وَالْمُعْتَقَةُ تَحْتَ الْعَبْدِ, if a slave woman is married to a slave, and then she is freed. She is set free, but he remains a slave. What happens? Because now you have a situation where he has the right over her because he holds divorce, and yet she is the one who is free and he is the one who is owned. So there is, that extra status that she now has, where you have a slave having an ability to control her, despite her being free, which is a bit strange. Yeah, it's a bit of a clash. So he says, what happens in this situation? He says here, lahal khiyar. So when she's freed, she said, look, you got a choice now. You want to remain with him, and he's your husband, and he has the rights of a husband over a wife, or you're free to leave him. And if you leave him, you can choose to leave him with one divorce or two divorces. 2 divorces with a slave is the same as 3 for a free person. So she has that choice. That's the choice that's given to her. And she has to make it. Once she makes it, it's up to her. It happened in the time of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the slave woman in that particular example chose herself. Chose herself. In other words, she chose to be released from her husband. وَمَنِ اشْتَرَى زَوْجَتَهُ وَمَنِ اشْتَرَى زَوْجَتَهُ إِنْ فَسَخَ نِكَاحَهُ. So this is another one. We mentioned before that it's permitted to be married to a slave even if you're a free person. so long as that slave belongs to somebody else. You can't be married to your own slave because you have a clash then of the right by ownership and the right by marriage, which one takes precedence and all that. So if you are married to a slave woman that belongs to, let's say Ahmed owns the slave that you're married to, and you buy that slave from Ahmed, suddenly you've put yourself in that position where you're both now married to a slave and she belongs to you as well. So what happens? He says here the marriage is dissolved. You're no longer considered to be married to her. That marriage is gone. She's now simply your slave woman if you buy her in that way. وَطَلَاقُ الْعَبْدِ طَلْقَتَانِ. When a slave divorces his wife, he has 2 divorces until he loses all his divorces and she has to marry somebody else, not 3. وَعِدَّةُ الْأَمَةُ حَيْضَةً. And her iddah is until she starts her 2nd period, not until she starts her 3rd period. Because he's going to go into iddahs now in more detail when we come in a second. And he says a few other differences. وَكَفَّارَاتُ الْعَبْدِ. In terms of kafara, expiation, the slave has the same expiations as a free person. So in certain things, there's a difference between a slave and a free one. And then he's going to mention had punishments now. Other things, they're the same. Although there is one difference when it comes to expiations, that sometimes an expiation involves freeing a slave or feeding people, and a slave's wealth is not fully his own. So if he wants to do the expiation in that form, he has to get permission of his owner. Otherwise, it's the same. He simply needs to get permission first for those particular ones. But they're the same, 60 people, 60 people. 60 days fasting, 60 days fasting. Freeing a slave, freeing a slave. No difference. بخلاف معاني الحدود والطلاق. But it's not the same when it comes to hudud, punishments, and things relating to talaq, to divorce. Hudud punishments, for example, a slave is never put to death in a had punishment. They have 50 lashes instead of 100 lashes for fornication, regardless of whether they're muhsana or not. 40 lashes for qadf, and so on and so on. So they're half the thing. But the thing is, the slaves, even if the slave murders somebody, if you're taking away the property belonging to somebody else. So in those situations, maybe the slave then themselves would become your own, but he's the property of somebody. So it's there's the other element of destruction of property. It's like it's almost like if a horse runs rampant, belonging to somebody and kills someone. But we'll come into more of those had relating things when we come into that section. And then another thing is the same, that they are allowed to have the same amount of wives. I think we mentioned that before, up to 4. And another thing that's different is that when a slave woman's husband goes missing, or the husband who goes missing is a slave, the period of time is halved. So it's 2 years rather than 4 years. So we're going to rada'. There's another thing we talked about before when we talked about the peoples who are haram for you. They are blood relation, those who are related to you by blood in a certain way, and those who are related to you by breast milk in a certain way. So what exactly does it mean? What do they mean by breastfeeding here? What do they mean by this? Is it simply when a baby sucks on a breast, or does it have to be 5 times or 10 times like with the Shafi'is and so on? He's trying to explain now what we as the Malikis mean by breastfeeding here. So he says here, وَكُلُّ مَا وَصَلَ إِلَى جَوْفِ الرَّضِيعِ فِي الْحَوْلَيْنِ مِنَ اللَّبَنِ. Any milk from the breast of a woman that's produced by the breast of a woman that reaches the stomach of the child in the hawlain, the 2 years that are allotted for breastfeeding, فَإِنَّهُ يحرم. It makes that woman haram for you. Yeah. وَإِن مَصَّ. He says, even if it's a single suckle, a single suck, just a tiny bit, as long as it's actually milk, or even if it's gone stale, even if it's just remained and it's coming out like a, almost like cheesy substance or something, still it has that effect. Yeah. So he'll come to that because he mentions something connected to that in a moment. So he says here, وَإِن مَصَّةً وَاحِدَةً, even if it's a single suckle, وَلَا يُحَرِّمُ مَا أُرْضِعَ بَعْدَ الْحَوْلَيْنِ إِلَّا مَا قَرُبَ مِنْهُمَا كَالشَّهْرِ وَنَحْوِهِ. He says here, but if that child is suckled after those 2 years have ended, then it does not make the person haram, except if it's only a little bit after. In other words, generally speaking, it was considered to be the limit for weaning was 2 years. But that's why he said except a little bit after, because with certain kids, they have a little bit more need than other kids. So it can go up to a month or maybe 2 months afterwards. That's the maximum sort of period. But the condition for this, even in the first 2 years, is that the child has to need the breast milk. In other words, it's not weaned. If the child can survive solely on food and water and does not need breast milk anymore, and it's reached that stage, and then it goes and suckles a woman's breast after that, not out of need, but simply out of familiarity, that would not have any effect, even if it's in the first 2 years. So it has to be within the first 2 years and out of need of sustenance from the breast, not simply out of familiarity with doing that. Some children may often be the case. A woman picks up a child and holds it to and suddenly the child is out of, habit, starts suckling. That wouldn't have an effect if that child's weaned. وَقِيلَ الشَّهْوَ شَهْرٍ, and it said it is up to 2 months. وَلَوْ فُصِلَ قَبْلَ الْحَوْلَيْنِ فِصَالًا اسْتُغْنِيَ فِيهِ بِالطَّعَامِ. If the child is weaned before the 2 years are up, in such a way that it no longer has a need of food, لَمْ يُحَرِّمْ مَا أُرْضِيَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ. Whatever he sucks after that of breast milk does not have any effect in making the woman haram for him. وَيُحَرِّمُ, this is what I'm going to come to now, what you were asking. وَيُحَرِّمُ بِالْوَجُورِ وَيُحَرَّمُ بِالْوَجُورِ وَالسَّعُودِ. And she becomes haram for him by wajur, which is when the milk is entered straight into the throat. In other words, it hasn't been suckled, but it's poured straight into the throat. In other words, then it's been expressed, or it drips down. Or when it's entered through the nose, and they add if it's entered also through the anus. What happens here is when it reaches the stomach, regardless, they even mention if it's through a hole that goes straight into the stomach, whichever way it enters the body, as soon as it reaches the stomach and the child derives sustenance from it and has a need of it, it makes the woman from whom it came haram. This applies even if that woman is asleep and the child is lying next to a sleeping woman. The woman has no idea. And the child comes or somebody expresses some breast milk from a woman and takes it to somebody else and they have no idea whatsoever and feeds it to this child. It doesn't have to be a conscious act. When that breast milk comes from a woman to a child in that state of need and age, it has that effect regardless. Even if the woman has died and the woman dies and the child then suckles her after she's already dead, it has that effect. Obviously, he can no longer be with that woman, but we're going to come to the relation, her relatives who this impacts as well. وَمَنْ أَرْضَعَتْ صَبِيًّا, if a woman breastfeeds a child, فَبَنَاتُ تِلْكَ الْمَرْأَةِ وَبَنَاتُ فَحْلِهَا. So it says when a woman breastfeeds a child, the daughters of that woman and the daughters of her fahl, and this is another word for husband, but it's a husband with whom she is currently sexually active. because that's a requirement here. Has to be somebody who she has had sexual intercourse with, and he's currently her husband, because breast milk is considered to be produced by what comes from a man and what comes from the woman. So if she was married to a man and had never been sexually active with him, his daughters would still be fine for that child that's breastfed, even if she then is sexually active with the husband afterwards, because that breast milk that the child had did not have any connection to her husband. But when he does have a connection to a husband through them being sexually active together, then the breast milk is considered to come from them both. So the daughters of the mother from a previous husband, the daughters of the woman breastfeeding you from a previous husband, are considered to be almost like your half brothers on the mother's side, and the daughters of that man from a previous wife are considered to be like your half brothers on the father's side. And their daughters are considered to be your full sisters. Yeah? So they're your half sister. I should say sister. Should say sisters for the other ones, because he mentions also it works the other way around as well. When the child is female, it's the brothers. When the child is male, it's all of the sisters. They're all your sisters, and you cannot marry your sister. Then that means also the woman who is breastfeeding you, her sisters. Her sisters are your aunts. You can't marry your aunt. The man who is currently her husband, his sisters, they're your aunts. They're your amma, your paternal aunts. Her mother's your grandmother. All of these women are forbidden to you as a result of this. So he said, "Ma taqaddama," those who were born to them beforehand, or those who are going to be born to them later, daughters, they are all your sisters. But what about your brother? That's the question here. So I'm being breastfed by a woman. I have a brother. Then my brother's not being breastfed by this woman, but he's my brother. Can he marry the daughters of this woman who is breastfeeding me? Yes, he can, because the connection is purely based on the breastfeeding and nothing else. It's nothing to do with blood. My connection is established through the breastfeeding, and then her blood becomes like my blood, yes. But that connection is not established the other way around, because there's nothing being imparted from me to my brother. So he says here, وَلِأَخِيهِ نِكَاحُ بَنَاتِهَا. Your brother can marry those daughters, your sisters, your milk sisters, the daughters of your milk mother. Is that clear or not? So here we're entering into a new chapter. It's connected though, so we're going to go into this a little bit until Isha. And that's to do with iddah and the nafaqah after divorce, the upkeep of a divorced woman, and what's called istibra, which is the equivalent of iddah for a slave woman when she changes from one person's ownership to another. So he says here, wa iddatul hurra, the iddah of a hurra mutallaqa. So we know there's two types of iddah. There's the iddah from a woman who's been divorced, and there's the iddah of a woman who has been widowed, whose husband has died. Those are the two types of iddah. There's slight differences between them, mainly in the length of time, but also in terms of mourning and things relating to mourning. Obviously, a divorced woman in the Malikiyah is not expected to observe mourning. وَعِدَّةُ الْحُرَّةِ, a free woman who is divorced, her iddah is ثَلَاثَةُ قُرُوء, is mentioned in the Quran. ثَلَاثَةُ قُرُوء. He says here, كانت مسلمة أو كتابية. I'm not going to explain what he means by quru yet, because he does. Regardless of whether your wife is Muslim or non-Muslim, whether she is a Muslim or a kitabiya, a person of the book, a Christian or a Jew, she still has to wait out an iddah after you divorce her. And he's going to mention later that the non-Muslims are forced to observe this, even though it's not part of their deen. their connection to that Muslim man means this is something they have to observe to protect the nasl of the Muslim man in case she gives birth to somebody after that, to know who the child is, because her children will be Muslims. So it's important to protect that. So she is forced to observe this. وَالْأَمَةُ وَمَنْ فِيهَا بَقِيَةُ رِقٍ قُرْآنٍ. A slave woman or any slave woman who is in the process of being freed or who has any aspect of slavehood left within her. And there are lots of different ways. Somebody who has been promised freedom after your death, somebody who is an walad, who is going to be free when you die automatically, someone who is half owned by you and half owned by somebody else, all these various different types of things. That's what we mean by somebody who still has a certain degree of freedom. If she is married to somebody, her iddah is 2 qurs. He's going to explain what a qur is in a minute. كان الزوج في جميعهن حرا أو عبدا. This iddah is purely to do with the status of the woman, nothing to do with the husband. So he says here it applies regardless of whether the husband is free or a slave. Makes no difference. It's purely to do with whether the woman herself is free or the woman herself is a slave. The length of her iddah is determined by that, regardless of who her husband is. Wal-aqra, this is another plural of quru, hiya al-athhar. So there's a difference of opinion between the madhabs about this. This word that's used in the Quran, quru, thalathata quru, Imam Malik said each qar is a tuhur, which is a period of purity between each menstrual period. So a woman has a period of bleeding, followed by a period of purity, followed by a period of bleeding, and so on and so on. That's the way it works. Imam Malik said this word referred to the periods of purity, and he said that the period of purity in which she is divorced counts as one of them. So it makes it shorter in a sense. So it has to have 3 of these completed, including the one she is divorced in, for her iddah to be done. In other words, her 3rd period has to have started from the time she was divorced. So هي الأطهار التي بين الدمين. It is the periods of purity between the bouts of bleeding. فإن كانت ممن لم تحض, if she is somebody who has not yet had her period, or ممن قد يئست من المحيض, or somebody who has passed the age of menopause and no longer has periods, menstrual periods, فثلاثة أشهر في الحرة والأمة. Both the free woman and the slave woman have to wait for 3 full months before their iddah is ended. I mean, this is based on the ayats of Quran, basically, that do not differentiate in this particular respect between the 2 types of women. So we take the ayat as it is. It's 3 months. وعدة الحرة المستحاضة. Then you have a woman who has what's called false menstruation. So some women, have something wrong with them, which means that they're constantly bleeding from down there. And there are women who are constantly bleeding from down there, and then they have their menstrual period, and you can see that the way the blood is changes. So it was like red blood, and then suddenly it becomes like a darker brownish blood when they're having their menstruation. That woman is the same as the ones we've been talking about. This is a woman whose bleeding looks the same, whether she's menstruating or not. You have no idea. So this particular woman, it's very difficult to count her periods because, sometimes it can last a long, long time. And also you don't know if she's pregnant or not, because this bleeding may simply be false menstrual bleeding and she's been pregnant the whole time. So the same applies to her. Also applies to a woman who suddenly inexplicably stops having her periods when she's well before the age of menopause. Or a woman who takes some medication and her periods stop and you have no idea what's happening with her. Or, falls sick and a particular type of illness prevents menstruation. In all of these cases, you don't know whether she's pregnant or not. You have no idea. And the purpose of this is dual. to prevent her getting married again, but also to make sure that her womb is free. This is the purpose of the iddah. So in this particular case, he says here, if a free woman or a slave woman has this condition where she's constantly bleeding and you can't tell whether she's menstruating or not, when she is divorced, she has to wait a year for her iddah to end. 9 months for the pregnancy to be, and then 3 months to actually have the iddah that's mentioned in the Book of Allah. Because the first 9 months are simply to ensure that she's not pregnant. And then when it's clear that she's not pregnant, then she has to do her iddah, because they're not the same thing. So the first 9 months is just to be sure. Then because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands that they have to wait for an iddah of 3 months, you add those 3 months. So it's a year. وعدة الحامل في وفاة أو طلاق وضع حملها. If a woman is pregnant when she is divorced, or indeed, he adds here, when her husband dies, leaving her a widow, then her iddah ends the moment she gives birth. Might be 1 day later. Her husband might divorce her, and then 1 day later she gives birth. That's the end of her iddah. Even with her husband might die, and then 1 day later she gives birth, she's no longer in her iddah. Finished. كان حرة أو أما, whether she is free or a slave, or kitabiyya or muslima, whether she's non-Muslim or Muslim, it's all the same. She has to, any pregnant woman, her iddah ends the moment she gives birth. وَالْمُطَلَّقَةُ الَّتِي لَمْ يَدْخُلْ بِهَا لَا عِدَّةَ لَهَا. And finally, if you marry a woman and then you both remain apart and you never have sexual intercourse with her at all, and then you divorce her, how long in iddah does she have to wait? No iddah. She's not required to wait an iddah. There's no purpose to it, in a sense. You've not had a sexual intercourse with her, and Allah tells us in the Quran again that you don't make them wait an iddah when you've divorced them without having had sexual intercourse with them. No. I mean, there might be oaths needed, but if both parties say, no, it didn't happen, and they've not been living together, or if they've been living together, then they swear oaths that they didn't have an intercourse, then that's it. وَعِدَّةُ الْحُرَّةِ مِنَ الْوَفَاةِ. As for the iddah of a widow, when her husband dies, it is أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرٍ. It is 4 months and 10 days for a free woman. So if a free woman's husband dies, she has to wait 4 months and 10 days. كانت صغيرة أو كبيرة, whether she got married as she's a child bride, and obviously they haven't been together yet, or she is an adult, whether her husband دخل بها أو لم يدخل, whether her husband had sexual intercourse with her or not. So if a man marries a woman, or a family marries 2 children together, then the husband dies, this child still has to wait out this iddah before she can be married to anybody else. Whether she's Muslima kanat or kitabiyya, whether she's Muslim or non-Muslim. وفي الأمة ومن فيها بقية رق, and with a slave woman and a partially owned person, somebody who is on the process of being freed. They can probably mention more of that in the section on slavery. Shahrani wa khamsa layal. They have to wait 2 months and 5 days. Or 5 nights, it says the same. Ma'alam, now he's doing an exception to all of this. So he said, the general position here is that when a man dies, his wife has to wait 4 months and 10 days or 2 months and 5 days, depending on whether she's free or not. Except in this case, he says, مَا لَمْ تَرْتَبِ الْكَبِيرَةُ ذَاتَ الْحَيْضِ, so long as the woman is not someone who is in the age where she has periods, but there are doubts about whether she's pregnant or not. Now these doubts, he says here, the first one, بِتَأْخِيرِهِ عَنْ وَقْتِهِ. Firstly, by her period not coming at its normal time. So if a period during these 4 months and 10 days or more likely the 2 months and 5 days, does not come in its normal time, then you extend this iddah beyond the 4 months and 10 days, or beyond the 2 months and 5 days. فَتَقْعَدْ, she remains in her iddah, she remains sitting literally, حَتَّى تَذْهَبَ الرِّيبَةِ, until the doubts are no longer present. In other words, either it appears that that either her menstrual period comes, or the 9 months of pregnancy pass and she doesn't give birth, or the women who are in the know, because this doubt may well have been by somebody putting her hand on her stomach and saying, oh, it feels like you might be with child here. That's another one of the ways. And then they say, no, okay, all right, I was wrong, it was gas, or whatever it was. When those doubts have gone, then her iddah is ended, or she completes until the 4 months and 10 days if it's the doubts have gone before then. But it can go on much longer than that. He will mention, I think, in a little bit. It can go up to 4 years or 5 years, depending upon the maximum time that people think of for pregnancy. If there is still a suspicion that she may be pregnant, but it's just taking its time. I mean, I think Imam Malik, rahimahullah, was meant to have been over a year's pregnancy, his wife. I can't remember the exact time, but the Arabs considered that it was possible that the pregnancy could be delayed by up to that period, by being lodging in a place and stopping the body from menstruating, but the pregnancy not taking hold for quite some time, so that up to, and some people said 4 years or 5 years, it could be still attributed to the husband. So if a man dies and then 4 years later his wife gives birth and she says she's not been with anyone but her husband, then it's still considered to be his child. That was the maximum, because you want to make sure you protect people as well as protecting lineage. Anything under under 6 months, if a woman marries a man and then 5 months later she gives birth, that's not considered to be that man's child. Because it's considered the minimum period is 6 months. In that case, it's considered to be walad lil firash, somebody that, either the previous person that she was with or out of wedlock entirely. Amma al-ama, well, he doesn't mention the word amma, but it's referring, this next bit here is referring to a slave woman. Wa amma allati la tahid lis-sigharin aw kibar, as for a woman who does not have any menstruation because she is too young or too old, وَقَدْ بَنَى بِهَا, and her husband has lain with her, has had sexual intercourse with her, فَلَا تَنْكِحُ فِي الْوَفَاةِ إِلَّا بَعْدَ 3 أشهر. She is not allowed to remarry when her husband has died, except after 3 months have passed. So this is referring to a slave woman. It's extending it beyond 2 months and 5 days to 3 months, when even if she is not of the age where you might expect her to have periods, if her husband has lain with her, just to be on the safe side, they extend it to 3 months, like with iddas from in divorce, just to be on the safe side, to make sure it's got no pregnancy. This is the weak position. The strong position is, if a woman is like that, it's still 2 months and 5 days. What time is the prayer? 8. Is it 8 past? Okay, well, I'll just do a little bit then. Well, ihdad, this is something that's connected to the iddah of wafat. It's called ihdad, which roughly is mourning, or the things that you do when it comes to mourning someone. Well, ihdadu an la taqrab al-mu'tadda min al-wafat. What ihdad is that when someone's husband has died and she has become a widow, she is not allowed to go la taqrubu shay'an min az-zina. She is not allowed to put on any form of adornment. or any ornamentation. Whether he says bihaliyin, whether that's putting on jewelry or finery of any sort, or kuhlin, or putting kuhl or other makeup, putting kuhl on her eyes, eyeliner, or putting on any other form of makeup. It's not allowed. With kuhl, or if there are medical reasons and there is a necessity, then that's a separate issue. This is generally for the purpose of zina, of looking good. She's not allowed to do it when she is a widow during her iddah. Or any other form of ornamenting, making herself look beautiful. وَتَجْتَنِبُ السِّبَاغِ كُلَّهُ, and she has to keep away from all types of dye in her clothes. She's not allowed to wear colorful clothing. إِلَّا الْأَسْوَدِ. So the only type of dye she's allowed to wear is black dye. In other words, she has to either wear white clothing or black clothing, but no type of colorful greens and reds and oranges and golds and anything like that. وَتَجْتَنِبُ الطِّيبَ, and she has to keep away from all types of perfume. She's not allowed to wear perfume at all. وَلَا تَخْتَبُّ بِحِنَا, she's not allowed to put henna on her hair or on her skin. وَلَا تَقْرَبُ دُهْنًا مُطَيَّبًا, she's not allowed to use oils and creams that are perfumed. وَلَا تَمْتَشِطُ بِمَا يُخْتَمَّرَ فِي رَأْسِهَا, and she's not allowed to brush in any type of substance into her hair that will leave her hair with the scent. So basically, she's meant to keep away from anything that will make her attractive to men during that period. For Imam Malik, this was specific to the iddah of the widow. As for somebody who's divorced, none of this applies to her. I think in some of the other madhabs, they say it applies to her, but no, not for Imam Malik. If a woman is divorced, she's still allowed to wear makeup, she's still allowed to dress nicely, and so on and so on. But a widow, no. Widows are expected to... The Messenger of Allah ﷺ basically said that no woman is allowed to mourn, or no person is allowed to mourn somebody for more than 3 days, except for a wife who mourns her husband for 4 months and 10 days. So that's where this comes from. The first part is also interesting. That applies even, I suppose, to children mourning their parents and so on. Just one last bit before we're done. وَعَلَى الْأَمَةُ وَالْحُرَّةُ وَالصَّغِيرَةُ وَالْكَبِيرَةُ الْإِحْدَادُ. Every type of woman has to do ihdad. Whether she's a free woman or a slave woman, whether she's young or old, whether she's child or adult, all of them. Except, he says, وَاخْتُلِفَ فِي الْكِتَابِيَّةِ. But there's a difference of opinion about the non-Muslim bride, because this may not be part of her way. But the strongest position is that even she has to do this. وَلَيْسَ عَلَى الْمُطَلَّقَ إِحْدَادٌ. But a divorced woman does not have to do this ihdad. So we'll finish there, inshallah, because the prayer is about to start. Let's complete this now, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم.